The storm rolled in faster than anyone had predicted, turning the Montana sky black as pitch and sending sheets of rain so thick that Victoria Oakley could barely see her own hands gripping the wagon's canvas cover. She had been traveling with the wagon train for 3 weeks now, heading west from Fort Benton toward the goldfields, and in all that time, she had never seen anything like this fury unleashed from the heavens. Thunder cracked overhead like rifle shots, and the wind howled through the prairie grass with such force that she felt certain the wagon would tip over at any moment. The other wagons had pulled ahead during the worst of it, their drivers whipping the horses into a frightened gallop, desperate to reach the shelter of the cottonwood grove they had spotted before the storm hit. Victoria had tried to keep up, but her 2 horses were older and slower, and when the right front wheel hit a hidden gully and cracked, she knew she was in trouble. She climbed down from the seat, rain instantly soaking through her wool traveling dress, and assessed the damage. The wheel had not broken completely, but it was damaged enough that continuing would risk a total collapse. She looked up, squinting through the deluge, and saw the last of the wagon train disappearing over the ridge. She called out, her voice lost in the roar of wind and rain. She called again, louder, but it was no use. They were gone. Victoria stood there for a moment, water streaming down her face, her heart pounding. She had paid wagon master Silas Templeton good money to guide her safely to the mining camps, where her brother had sent word of a teaching position at the new schoolhouse. She had trusted him. She had believed his promises of safety and protection. Now she understood the cold reality of the frontier. When circumstances turned dire, it was every person for themselves. Templeton had not even looked back. She climbed back onto the wagon seat, pulling the canvas tighter around herself, and tried to think rationally. The storm would pass. It had to. She would wait it out here, fix the wheel as best she could, and then follow the trail. She had supplies, she had water, she had her father's old rifle. She would survive this. She had to. But as the hours wore on, and the storm showed no signs of abating, as the temperature dropped and the rain turned to sleet, Victoria felt the first real tendrils of fear wrapping around her chest. The horses whinnied and stamped nervously, and she could hear something out in the darkness beyond the wagon, something moving through the grass. Wolves, perhaps, or worse. She clutched the rifle closer, her fingers numb with cold, and prayed for dawn. That was when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. At first she thought she was imagining it, her desperate mind conjuring rescue where there was none. But the sound grew louder, more distinct, and then through the rain she saw a rider approaching, hunched low in the saddle, his horse moving with steady determination through the storm. Victoria's hand tightened on the rifle, uncertainty flooding through her. Out here, a lone rider could mean salvation or disaster, and there was no way to know which until it was too late. The rider pulled up beside her wagon, and even in the dim light she could see he was young, probably not much older than her own 22 years. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a heavy oilskin coat, and he sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. When he looked up at her, his eyes were dark and serious. "Miss Oakley," he called out, his voice cutting through the wind. She was so surprised to hear her name that she nearly dropped the rifle. "How do you know who I am?" "I rode with the wagon train," he said. "Saw them leave you behind." "Name is Xavier Garrett. I work for Templeton as a scout, but I will not work for him anymore after what I just saw." Victoria felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "He left me here." "I know," Xavier said, and there was something in his voice that spoke of barely controlled anger. "I was riding ahead, checking the trail, and when I came back I saw the whole train was already at the grove. I asked where you were, and Templeton said you had fallen behind and there was nothing to be done about it. Said we could not risk the others for one woman. I told him that was not how decent people behaved, and he told me if I did not like it, I could ride back and play hero myself. Xavier's jaw tightened. So that is exactly what I did. Victoria stared at him, hardly able to believe what she was hearing. You quit your job to come back for me. I would not want to work for a man like that anyway, Xavier said firmly. Now we need to get you and your wagon to shelter. Can you drive if I lead your horses? The wheel is damaged, Victoria said quickly. It might not hold. Xavier dismounted in one smooth motion and moved to examine the wheel, running his hands over the spokes even as the rain continued to pour down. After a moment, he straightened. It will hold if we go slow and careful. The grove is not far. We can make it. He did not wait for her agreement. Simply untied his horse's reins and looped them over the saddle horn, then moved to take hold of her team's harnesses. Victoria watched him work, this stranger who had ridden back into a storm for her, and felt something shift inside her chest, something she could not quite name. "Why did you really come back?" she asked softly. Xavier looked up at her, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and for a moment their eyes met. "Because leaving you out here would have been the wrong thing to do," he said simply. "And I have made enough mistakes in my life already. I will not make that one." Then he clicked his tongue to the horses and began leading them forward, slowly and carefully, through the storm. Victoria held tight to the wagon seat, her heart beating hard, and realized that everything had just changed. The journey to the cottonwood grove felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 30 minutes. Xavier walked ahead of the horses the entire way, guiding them around the worst of the ruts and rocks, his movements deliberate and careful despite the storm raging around them. Victoria watched him from the wagon seat, studying the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with such confidence even in the terrible conditions. She knew nothing about this man except his name and the fact that he had sacrificed his livelihood to help her, but somehow that felt like enough. When they finally reached the shelter of the trees, Victoria could see the other wagons circled up ahead, their canvas covers glowing faintly from the lanterns inside. Xavier led her wagon to a spot on the edge of the grove, away from the others, and helped her secure the horses before finally allowing himself to take shelter under her wagon's canvas. He was soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and Victoria realized she must look just as bedraggled. She fumbled with shaking hands to light her lantern, and in its warm glow she got her first good look at Xavier Garrett. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, with strong features and dark eyes that held both kindness and determination. There was a scar along his left cheekbone, faint but visible, and his hands bore the calluses of hard work. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had spent his life on the frontier, who knew how to survive and how to endure. "Thank you," Victoria said, and her voice came out hoarse with emotion. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not come back." Xavier met her eyes. "You do not need to thank me. I only did what any decent person should have done." "Except no one else did," Victoria pointed out. "Silas Templeton certainly did not." Xavier's expression darkened. "Templeton is a fool. He has been cutting corners this whole journey, pushing too hard, not maintaining the wagons properly. I have been telling him for weeks that someone was going to get hurt, but he would not listen. Said I was too young to know what I was talking about." He shook his head. "Well, now he can find himself another scout." Victoria wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, still shivering from the cold. "What will you do now?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, considering. "I suppose I will head to the mining camps like everyone else, try to find work." maybe higher on with another wagon train heading back east for supplies. He glanced at her. What about you? Where were you heading? Helena, Victoria said. My brother arranged for me to teach at the new schoolhouse there. He has been in the goldfields for 2 years now, doing well enough to send for me. I sold everything I had back in Fort Benton to make this journey. She looked down at her hands. If I do not reach Helena, I have nothing to go back to. Then we will make sure you reach Helena, Xavier said firmly. Victoria looked up at him in surprise. You cannot travel alone, Xavier said. It is not safe, and besides, your wagon needs proper repairs before you go much farther. I know wagons and I know this country. If you will have me, I would like to see you safely to your destination. Victoria felt her throat tighten with emotion. I cannot pay you much. I used most of my money for the passage with Templeton. I am not asking for payment, Xavier said quietly. I am asking if you will let me help you, because it is the right thing to do and because I want to. Victoria studied his face, looking for any hint of deception or ulterior motive, but found only honest sincerity. In that moment, she made a decision that would change the course of her life. Yes, she said, I would be grateful for your help. Xavier nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Good. Then we have an agreement. He glanced out at the storm, which was finally beginning to ease. Get some rest if you can. In the morning, I will fix that wheel properly, and then we will decide our next move. He started to leave, heading back out into the rain, but Victoria stopped him. Where are you going? To make camp, give you some privacy. You will freeze out there, Victoria protested. The storm may have eased, but it is still cold and wet. You can sleep under the wagon. It is not much, but it is better than nothing. Xavier hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and practicality. Finally, he nodded. Thank you, I will take you up on that. He settled himself beneath the wagon with his bedroll, and Victoria lay down inside on her narrow cot, the lantern extinguished. She could hear him moving below her, getting comfortable, and the sound was oddly reassuring. For the first time since the storm had hit, she felt safe. Xavier. She called softly into the darkness. Yes, thank you again, for coming back, for not leaving me. There was a pause, and then his voice came back, warm and sure. I will not leave you, Victoria. I promise you that. I will not make that mistake. Victoria closed her eyes, pulling the blanket tighter around herself, and felt something warm bloom in her chest. She did not know this man, not really, but somehow she believed him. And that belief felt like the beginning of something important. Morning came slowly, the sun rising pale and weak through the dissipating storm clouds. Victoria woke to the sound of Xavier already at work, examining the damaged wheel with careful attention. She climbed down from the wagon, smoothing her still damp dress as best she could, and found him crouched beside the wheel with tools spread out on the ground. Good morning, she said. He looked up and smiled, and Victoria realized it was the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. Good morning. I hope I did not wake you. Not at all. How bad is it? Not as bad as it could be, Xavier said, turning back to the wheel. 2 spokes are cracked and the rim is bent slightly, but I can fix it well enough to get us to the next town. We will need to replace the whole wheel eventually, but this will hold for now. Victoria watched him work, impressed by the efficient, confident way he handled the tools. Where did you learn to do that? My father was a Wainwright back in Missouri, Xavier said, not looking up from his work. I grew up in his shop learning the trade. When I was 16, I decided the settled life was not for me, so I headed west, been out here ever since. He glanced up at her. What about you? What made a schoolteacher from Fort Benton decide to head into the mining camps? Victoria sat down on a nearby log, pulling her shawl around her shoulders. The morning air was cold and crisp. I was born in Ohio, actually. My father was a teacher, and he taught me everything he knew. When he died 3 years ago, my mother and I moved to Fort Benton to be near her sister. Then my mother passed last winter, and my brother Thomas wrote to say there was a position open in Helena. I had nothing keeping me in Fort Benton, so I decided to take the chance. That was brave of you, Xavier said, driving a wedge into place with careful taps of his hammer. Not many women would make that journey alone. I did not intend to make it alone, Victoria pointed out wryly. I was supposed to be with a wagon train. Xavier's expression darkened. About that, Templeton sent one of his men over at first light, said you could rejoin the train if you wanted now that the storm has passed. Victoria felt a flash of anger. How generous of him, after he left me to die in the storm. That is more or less what I told his man, Xavier said with satisfaction, along with a few other choice words. They are breaking camp now, heading out within the hour. We will let them go and follow at our own pace. You really do not have to do this, Victoria said, though she desperately hoped he would not change his mind. I know you have your own plans, your own life to live. Xavier set down his hammer and looked at her directly. Victoria, I want to do this. I want to help you reach Helena safely. And if I am being honest, I am tired of working for men like Templeton who only care about profit and not about people. Maybe this is a chance for me to do something different, something better. He paused. Unless you would rather I leave you alone. No, Victoria said quickly, more quickly than she had intended. No, I would like you to stay. I would like your help. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went deeper than mere words. Xavier nodded slowly, then returned to his work on the wheel. Victoria sat and watched him, and realized that, despite the danger and uncertainty of her situation, she felt more hopeful than she had in months. By mid-morning, Xavier had the wheel repaired well enough for travel. They could hear the sounds of the wagon train departing in the distance, the crack of whips and the rumble of wheels, but neither of them moved to join it. Xavier hitched up Victoria's horses and checked all the harnesses and connections, then saddled his own horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Scout. We will take it slow today, he said as Victoria climbed onto the wagon seat. Give that wheel time to prove itself, and keep an eye out for a good place to camp before nightfall. There is a trading post about 2 days from here where we can get supplies and maybe find a replacement wheel. You seem to know this country well, Victoria observed. I have been through here 6 times in the past 3 years, Xavier said, swinging up into his saddle. It is good country when you know where the water is and where to avoid trouble. He glanced at her. Stay alert and let me know if you see anything concerning. There are Blackfeet in this area, and while most of them are peaceful, some of the younger warriors are not happy about all the miners and settlers coming through. Victoria nodded, feeling a small flutter of nervousness. She had heard stories about Indian attacks, though she had never experienced one herself. Still, having Xavier riding alongside her made her feel safer than she had felt with the entire wagon train. They traveled through country that was breathtakingly beautiful in the clear morning light. The storm had washed the prairie clean, and everything seemed to sparkle with fresh color. Wildflowers dotted the grasslands in shades of purple and yellow, and in the distance, snow-capped mountains rose against the blue sky. Victoria found herself relaxing despite the circumstances, enjoying the peace and quiet after the chaos of the storm. Xavier rode sometimes ahead, sometimes beside the wagon, always watchful. He pointed out landmarks and explained the geography, showing her where the best water could be found and which plants were edible in an emergency. Victoria listened and learned, grateful for his knowledge and patience. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of dried meat and hard bread. They sat together in the shade of the wagon, and Victoria found herself studying Xavier when she thought he was not looking. There was something about him that drew her attention, something beyond his obvious competence and kindness. He had a stillness to him, a sense of someone who was comfortable in his own skin, and she envied that confidence. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Of course. That scar on your face. How did you get it?" Xavier's hand moved unconsciously to touch the faint line along his cheekbone. "Bar fight in Virginia City 2 years ago. I was breaking up an argument between two miners and one of them came at me with a broken bottle. Could have been worse. The other scout I was with took a knife in the shoulder. That was very brave of you breaking up a fight like that," Xavier shrugged, "or very foolish. Sometimes it is hard to tell the difference." He looked at her curiously. "What about you? Any scars or stories?" Victoria smiled slightly. "Nothing so dramatic. I fell out of a tree when I was 12 and broke my arm. It healed crooked, so I cannot fully straighten it anymore. See?" She extended her left arm to show him the slight bend at the elbow. Xavier examined it with gentle fingers, and Victoria felt her breath catch at the contact. "Does it hurt?" he asked. "Not anymore. Just a reminder to be more careful." "Or a reminder that you are brave enough to climb trees even when you are not supposed to," Xavier said, and there was warmth in his voice that made Victoria's heart beat faster. They continued on through the afternoon, and as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, Xavier found them a good camping spot near a small creek with clear water and good grazing for the horses. He helped Victoria set up her camp, building a fire and filling her water barrels, and insisted on cooking dinner over the flames. "You have done enough work today driving that wagon," he said when she protested. "Let me do this." Victoria sat and watched him work, noting the easy skill with which he handled the cooking gear and provisions. He made a simple stew from dried vegetables and salted meat, but it tasted better than anything Victoria had eaten in weeks. They ate together as the stars began to appear overhead, and Victoria found herself telling him about her childhood in Ohio, about her father's love of learning and her mother's gentle kindness. Xavier listened with genuine interest, asking questions and sharing his own memories in return. She learned that he was 24 years old, that he had 2 younger sisters back in Missouri whom he had not seen in years, and that he sent them money whenever he could. She learned that he had worked as a scout, a ranch hand, a freight wagon driver, and half a dozen other jobs since coming west. She learned that he loved this wild country with a fierce passion, that he could not imagine living anywhere else. "What about a family?" Victoria asked, then immediately felt her cheeks flush. "I am sorry, that was too personal." "No, it is all right," Xavier said, poking at the fire with a stick. "I thought about it once. There was a girl in Denver, the daughter of the man I was working for, pretty thing, always laughing. We talked about getting married, settling down, maybe starting a ranch." He was quiet for a moment. "But she wanted me to give up the wandering life to stay in one place and be respectable. I tried for her sake, but I could not do it. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in town with the same people and the same routines every day. So I left, and she married the bank clerk instead." He looked up at Victoria. "I hurt her badly by leaving, and I have always regretted that. Not the leaving itself, but the way I did it. I should have been more honest with her from the start about who I was and what I needed." Victoria nodded slowly, understanding more about him in that moment than hours of conversation could have revealed. "Do you think you will ever settle down?" "Maybe someday," Xavier said thoughtfully. "If I found the right reason to. The right person who understood that settling down does not have to mean giving up who you are," He met her eyes across the fire. "What about you? Was there anyone back in Fort Benton?" "No," Victoria said softly. "There were a few men who expressed interest, but none that I felt drawn to. My mother always said I was too particular, that I was waiting for something that did not exist. Maybe she was right. Or maybe you just knew what you needed and refused to settle for less," Xavier said. "That does not seem like a fault to me." Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. She looked at Xavier across the flames and saw him looking back at her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was something happening between them, something neither of them had planned but both of them felt. "I should let you get some rest," Xavier said finally, breaking the moment. "We have another long day tomorrow." Victoria nodded, though she found she did not want the evening to end. "Good night, Xavier, and thank you for everything." "Good night, Victoria." She climbed into her wagon and lay down, but sleep was slow to come. She kept thinking about Xavier's words, about the way he had looked at her, about the growing certainty in her heart that meeting him was no accident but something like fate. The next 2 days passed in much the same way, falling into a rhythm that felt both comfortable and charged with unspoken feeling. They traveled during the day, Xavier always watchful and Victoria learning more about the country with each passing hour. They made camp at night, cooked together, talked for hours under the stars. With each conversation, Victoria felt herself drawn deeper into understanding who Xavier Garrett truly was beneath the capable exterior. He told her about the time he had helped a Crow family whose wagon had broken down, staying with them for 3 days to make repairs and hunt food, refusing any payment. He told her about the grizzly bear he had encountered in the mountains, how he had backed away slowly while talking to it in a calm voice, and how his hands had shaken for an hour afterward. He told her about the most beautiful sunrise he had ever seen, watching it from a mountaintop with the whole world spread out below him. In turn, Victoria told him about her dreams of building a real school someday, a place where children could learn not just reading and arithmetic but music and art and science. She told him about the book of poetry her father had given her before he died, which she still carried with her everywhere. She told him about her fear that she was not brave enough for this wild country, that she would fail at teaching in Helena and have nowhere else to go. "You are brave enough," Xavier said firmly when she confessed this fear. "You were brave enough to make this journey alone, brave enough to survive that storm, brave enough to trust a stranger to help you. That takes more courage than most people ever show." "I did not feel brave," Victoria admitted. "I felt terrified." "Being brave does not mean you are not afraid," Xavier said. "It means you do the right thing even when you are afraid, and that is exactly what you have done." Victoria looked at him, this man who had appeared in her life so suddenly and who had already changed it so profoundly, and felt something click into place in her heart. She was falling in love with Xavier Garrett. It was too soon, too fast, too unexpected, but it was happening all the same, and she could not stop it even if she wanted to. And she found that she did not want to. On the afternoon of the 3rd day since leaving the wagon train, they reached the trading post Xavier had mentioned. It was a rough collection of buildings surrounded by a palisade fence, sitting at the junction of 2 trails. The proprietor was a grizzled man named Jessup who recognized Xavier immediately. "Garrett, you old dog," Jessup said, shaking Xavier's hand vigorously. "What brings you through here?" "And who is this lovely lady?" "Miss Victoria Oakley," Xavier said. "I am escorting her to Helena. We need supplies and a new wagon wheel if you have one." Jessup's eyes sharpened with interest. "Escorting her, eh? What happened to the wagon train you were scouting for?" "Left her behind in a storm," Xavier said flatly. So I quit and came back for her." Jessup let out a low whistle. "Templeton is not going to be happy about that. He was already short on good men." "Templeton can find himself another scout," Xavier said. "I will not work for a man who leaves women to die just to save a little time." Jessup nodded approvingly. "Good for you, boy. Come on, let us see what we can do about that wheel." They spent the rest of the afternoon at the trading post. Jessup did indeed have a suitable replacement wheel, and he and Xavier worked together to install it properly while Victoria browsed the limited selection of goods in the store. She was examining a bolt of blue fabric when Jessup's wife, a Shoshone woman named Little Bird, approached her. "That one is good," Little Bird said, nodding at Xavier through the window where he worked. "He has a good heart. He helped us 3 winters ago when raiders attacked, rode with my husband to chase them off, got shot in the leg for his trouble, never asked for anything in return." Victoria looked at Xavier with new eyes. "He was shot in the thigh, still has the scar, I would wager." Little Bird smiled knowingly. "He is a good man. If he has chosen to protect you, you can trust him with your life." "I am beginning to realize that," Victoria said softly. When Xavier and Jessup finished with the wheel, they all shared dinner together in the trading post's main room. Jessup told stories about the early days in Montana Territory, before the gold rush brought so many people flooding west, and Little Bird spoke about her childhood among the Shoshone people. Victoria listened, fascinated, realizing how much she still had to learn about this country and its people. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Jessup pulled Xavier aside. Victoria pretended not to listen, but she could not help overhearing. "You are planning to stay with her all the way to Helena?" Jessup asked. "That is the plan," Xavier confirmed. "And after?" Xavier was quiet for a moment. "I have not thought that far ahead." "Maybe you should," Jessup said meaningfully. "That is a fine woman, Xavier, and the way you look at her and she looks at you, well, even an old fool like me can see what is brewing there." "It is complicated," Xavier said. "Love always is," Jessup replied. "But that does not mean it is not worth it." Victoria felt her heart race at the word love. Was it really that obvious? Could Xavier tell how she felt about him? And more importantly, did he feel the same way? She got her answer that evening. They had camped in a beautiful spot overlooking a valley, with the mountains rising purple in the distance. After dinner, they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The silence between them was comfortable but charged, full of things neither of them had said. Finally, Xavier spoke. "Victoria, I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, her heart pounding. "What is it?" "These past few days with you have been some of the best of my life," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I know we have not known each other long, but I feel like I know you in a way that matters. And I need you to know that this, being here with you, helping you reach Helena, it is not just a duty or an obligation. It is something I want to do because being with you makes me happy. You make me happy." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. "You make me happy too, Xavier, happier than I have been in a very long time. But I do not want to presume anything," Xavier continued, looking down at his hands. "I know you have your teaching position waiting in Helena, your brother expecting you. I know you have a life planned out, and I am just a wandering cowboy with no home and no prospects. I have no right to ask you for anything." "What would you ask for if you had the right?" Victoria whispered. Xavier looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw everything she needed to know. "I would ask for a chance to court you properly, to show you that I could be the kind of man you deserve, a chance to see if what I am feeling might grow into something real and lasting." He reached out and gently took her hand. "I know it is too soon to speak of love, but Victoria, I think I am falling for you, and I needed you to know that before we reach Helena and you start your new life." Victoria felt a tear slip down her cheek. Xavier, it is not too soon, at least not for me. I have been falling for you since the moment you rode back into that storm for me. Maybe even before that, in that first instant when you said you would not make the mistake of leaving me behind. She squeezed his hand. You are not just some wandering cowboy to me. You are the man who saved my life. You are the man who makes me laugh and makes me feel safe and makes me believe that I can survive anything. And I would very much like to give you that chance you are asking for. Xavier's face broke into a smile so bright and genuine that Victoria's heart ached with the beauty of it. Truly. Truly, she said, smiling through her tears. Xavier reached up with his free hand and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, but it sent electricity racing through Victoria's entire body. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. I have wanted to do that since the first morning I saw you smile, Xavier admitted. Then you should do it again, Victoria said, and he did. They sat together under the stars that night, holding hands and talking about the future in a way neither of them had allowed themselves before. Xavier told her about his dream of having a small ranch someday, just enough land to raise horses and live comfortably. Victoria told him about her hope of eventually opening her own school, independent of any church or town council. They talked about what it might be like to build those dreams together, and with each word, the future seemed less uncertain and more full of possibility. I need to tell you something else, Xavier said as the night grew deeper. That thing Jessup mentioned about me getting shot. It was not some heroic act. I was young and stupid and thought I could take on 3 armed men by myself. I nearly died because I was too proud to wait for help. If little Bird had not been there to patch me up, I would not be here right now. Why are you telling me this? Victoria asked gently. Because I want you to know all of me, not just the good parts. I have made mistakes, Victoria. I have been reckless and foolish. That girl in Denver I told you about, I hurt her badly because I was not honest with myself about what I wanted. I do not want to make those mistakes again, especially not with you. Victoria turned to face him fully. Xavier, I do not expect you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest with me and with yourself, and from what I have seen, you are already doing that. I will always be honest with you, Xavier promised. That is something I can give you, even if I cannot give you wealth or position or security. You have already given me more than that, Victoria said. You gave me your protection when no one else would. You gave me your time and your knowledge and your kindness. You gave me hope that I could make this journey and build a new life. That is worth more than any amount of money. Xavier pulled her close, and Victoria rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She felt, for the first time since her mother's death, like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The remaining days of the journey to Helena passed in a blur of happiness. Xavier and Victoria traveled together, and now that their feelings were acknowledged, there was a new ease between them. They talked about everything and nothing, shared stories and dreams, and stole kisses whenever they stopped to rest. Victoria found herself noticing little things about Xavier. The way he always checked on the horses before seeing to his own comfort. The way he hummed softly to himself when he thought she was not listening. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at her. Xavier, for his part, seemed to be memorizing everything about Victoria. He watched her when she read from her book of poetry in the evenings, listened with genuine interest when she talked about teaching methods and educational philosophy, and treated her with a respect and care that made her feel treasured. They passed other travelers on the trail. Miners heading to the gold fields with hopeful expressions and worn equipment, families seeking new land, merchants hauling goods to the mining camps. Xavier greeted each group cautiously but politely, always making sure to position himself between Victoria and any potential threat. His protectiveness never felt stifling, though, just reassuring. One afternoon, they encountered a small group of Blackfeet warriors on horseback. Victoria felt her heart leap into her throat, but Xavier raised his hand in greeting and spoke to them in their own language. The conversation was brief, and the warriors rode on without incident, but Victoria was shaking as they departed. "You speak their language?" she asked, amazed. "Enough to get by," Xavier said. "I spent a winter with a Blackfeet band 3 years ago when I got caught in a blizzard. They took me in, let me stay in the lodge of one of the elders, taught me to survive in the deep snow. I learned some of their language and their ways. They are good people, Victoria, though you would not know it from the way most settlers talk about them. I think there is a lot I need to learn about this country and the people who live here," Victoria said thoughtfully. "There is time for that," Xavier said, smiling at her. "A lifetime, if we are lucky." The words hung between them, full of promise and possibility. They reached Helena on a bright afternoon in early June, the town sprawling across the valley in a chaotic jumble of buildings and mining operations. The streets were crowded with people. Miners, merchants, gamblers, saloon girls, families, drifters. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the air as new buildings went up daily. It was loud and rough and exciting, and Victoria felt both intimidated and exhilarated. Xavier guided her wagon through the main street to a more respectable area where the churches and schools were located. They found the schoolhouse easily, a new wooden building painted white with a bell tower on top. Beside it was a small cottage, and standing on the porch was a man who could only be Victoria's brother Thomas. He was older than Victoria by 5 years, with the same dark hair and green eyes, and his face lit up with joy when he saw her. He ran down from the porch and helped her down from the wagon, pulling her into a fierce hug. "Victoria, thank God you are safe. I was starting to worry when you did not arrive with Templeton's train. He came through 3 days ago and said you had left the group." Thomas pulled back and looked at her searchingly. "What happened?" "It is a long story," Victoria said, glancing at Xavier. "Thomas, this is Xavier Garrett. He saved my life when the wagon master left me behind in a storm." Thomas turned to Xavier, studying him with the protective intensity of an older brother. "Left her behind. Templeton decided not to wait when her wagon was damaged," Xavier said simply. "I disagreed with that decision, so I rode back to help her." Thomas's expression softened. "Then I owe you a debt I can never repay. Thank you for bringing my sister safely to me." "It was my honor," Xavier said, and Victoria heard the double meaning in his words. Thomas invited them both inside the cottage for coffee, and Victoria told him the whole story of the journey. The storm, Xavier's rescue, the days traveling together. She left out the personal parts, the growing feelings and the kisses under the stars, but something in her voice must have given her away because Thomas kept glancing between her and Xavier with a knowing expression. "So what are your plans now, Garrett?" Thomas asked as they finished their coffee. Xavier glanced at Victoria, and she saw uncertainty in his eyes for the first time since she had met him. "I have not decided yet. I was thinking of looking for work here in Helena, maybe with one of the freight companies or as a ranch hand at one of the spreads outside town." "You are planning to stay in Helena?" Thomas asked, and there was approval in his voice. "If I can find work," Xavier said carefully. "I would like to stay close by if that is acceptable to everyone involved." "It is more than acceptable," Victoria said quickly, then felt her cheeks flush as both men looked at her. "I mean, Xavier has been such a help to me. It would be good to have a friend nearby as I settle into my new position." "A friend," Thomas repeated, his lips twitching with amusement. "I see." Xavier cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should go find lodgings for tonight. Let you two catch up properly." "Nonsense," Thomas said. "We have a spare room here, and you are welcome to use it until you find more permanent arrangements. Anyone who saved my sister's life is welcome in my home." So Xavier stayed, and over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Victoria began preparing for the school year, meeting with the other teachers and the town council members who had hired her. Xavier found work as a supervisor for one of the freight companies, his experience and knowledge making him valuable despite his youth. He rented a small room above the livery stable, but he spent most of his free time at the cottage with Victoria and Thomas. Thomas, for his part, seemed to approve of the growing relationship between his sister and Xavier. He told Victoria privately that he liked Xavier's honesty and work ethic, that he thought Xavier was the kind of man who would treat her well. Coming from her protective older brother, that approval meant everything. But as the days turned into weeks, Victoria began to sense a tension in Xavier. He was still kind and attentive, still made time to see her every day, but there was something troubled in his expression when he thought she was not looking. Finally, one evening when they were walking together on the outskirts of town, she confronted him about it. "What is wrong, Xavier? And please do not tell me nothing, because I can see that something is bothering you." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. "I am trying to figure out if I am doing the right thing," he finally said. "What do you mean, being here, staying in Helena?" "Working a regular job." He ran his hand through his hair in frustration. "I thought I could do it, Victoria. I thought that if I had the right reason, the right person, I could settle down and be happy. But I feel that same restlessness starting again, that need to move, to see what is over the next ridge. And I am terrified that I am going to hurt you the way I hurt that girl in Denver, because I cannot be what you need me to be." Victoria felt her heart clench with fear, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "What do I need you to be, Xavier? Stable, settled, a man with a future who can provide for you properly." "Is that what you think I need?" Victoria asked. "Or is that what you think you should be?" Xavier looked at her, confusion clear on his face. Victoria took his hands in hers. "Xavier, I did not fall in love with you because I thought you were stable or settled. I fell in love with you because you are brave and honest and kind. Because you love this wild country the way I am learning to love it. Because you see me not as someone who needs to be protected and coddled, but as someone who is capable and strong." She took a deep breath. "I do not need you to change who you are to be with me. I need you to be yourself, the man who rode back into a storm because it was the right thing to do." "But your teaching position, your life here in Helena," Xavier protested. "I cannot ask you to give that up to follow me around the frontier." "Then do not ask me to," Victoria said. "Ask me instead to build a life with you, whatever that life looks like. Maybe it means I teach in Helena during the school year and travel with you in the summers. Maybe it means we find a piece of land between here and the trail routes where you can work, and I can establish a small school. Maybe it means something neither of us has thought of yet." She squeezed his hands. "The point is, we figure it out together. I am not that girl in Denver, Xavier. I am not asking you to suffocate yourself to be with me. I am asking you to let us find a way to honor both our dreams." Xavier stared at her, and Victoria saw tears shining in his eyes. "How are you so wise?" "I am not wise," Victoria said, smiling through her own tears. "I am just in love with you, and I am not willing to let you go without a fight." Xavier pulled her into his arms and kissed her with a passion that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead against hers. "I love you, Victoria Oakley. I have loved you since that first night in the storm when you offered me shelter under your wagon. I have just been too afraid to believe I deserved you." "You deserve me," Victoria said firmly, "and I deserve you. We deserve each other and the happiness we can build together." "Then let us build it," Xavier said. "However it looks, wherever it takes us, let us build it together." They walked back to the cottage hand in hand, their future uncertain but their love sure. When they told Thomas their plans that evening, he listened carefully and then smiled. "I had a feeling this was coming," he said, "and I am happy for both of you. Victoria, you have always been too independent to follow the traditional path. And Xavier, I can see that you care for my sister deeply. If you two are willing to forge your own way, then you have my blessing and my support." The engagement was announced the following week, and the wedding was planned for September, after Victoria had finished her first term of teaching. The ladies of Helena threw her a small party, and Xavier's employer gave him a bonus that he immediately put toward purchasing a piece of land outside town. A beautiful spot near a creek with good grazing and enough flat ground to build on. Victoria taught through the summer with growing confidence and skill. She loved working with the children, loved seeing their faces light up when they mastered a new concept. She established herself as a firm but kind teacher, and the town council was already talking about expanding the school and hiring more teachers for the following year. Xavier worked hard at the freight company, earning respect and trust from his co-workers and bosses. But he and Victoria also spent their free time planning their future, sketching out the design for a small ranch house, discussing how they would manage his need to travel with her commitment to teaching, dreaming about the life they would build together. In August, Xavier took Victoria to see the land he had purchased. It was even more beautiful than she had imagined, with the mountains rising in the distance and the creek singing over smooth stones. They stood together on a small rise that overlooked the whole property, and Xavier wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "I think it is perfect," Victoria said. "I can already see the house there with a big porch where we can sit in the evenings. And there, that flat area, that would be perfect for a barn and corrals. And over there," Xavier said, pointing to a spot near the creek, "we could build a small schoolhouse. Nothing as big as the one in Helena, but enough for the ranch children in the area to have a place to learn. You could teach there when you are not working in town." Victoria turned in his arms to look at him. "You would do that, build me a school?" "I would build you anything you wanted," Xavier said seriously. "A school, a house, a library, whatever would make you happy." "Because your happiness is my happiness, Victoria." She kissed him then, long and deep, and felt the last of her doubts and fears melt away. This was right. They were right. Together they could build something beautiful. The wedding took place on a perfect September afternoon, with the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides and the air crisp with the promise of autumn. The ceremony was held in Helena's small church, with Thomas giving Victoria away and half the town in attendance. Xavier wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome, and Victoria wore a simple white dress that Thomas had ordered specially from San Francisco. When the preacher asked if Xavier would take Victoria as his lawfully wedded wife, Xavier's voice rang out clear and strong. "I will, and I promise to spend every day of my life making sure she never regrets saying yes to me." When Victoria said her own vows, she looked directly into Xavier's eyes. "I will, and I promise to always see you for who you truly are and to support every dream we build together." The kiss they shared as husband and wife was met with cheers and applause, and Victoria felt like her heart might burst with joy. The reception was held at the hotel dining room with food and music and dancing. Victoria danced first with her new husband, then with Thomas, then with Xavier again. She was introduced to dozens of people, all wishing them well, all saying what a lovely couple they made. But through it all, her eyes kept finding Xavier's, and each time their gazes met, she felt that jolt of connection and love. Late in the evening, they slipped away to the small house Xavier had rented for them to live in until their ranch house was built. It was modest but clean, with a bedroom and a small sitting room and a kitchen. Xavier carried Victoria over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently in the middle of their new home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," he said softly. "It sounds strange hearing that name," Victoria admitted, "but I like it." "I like it too," Xavier said, pulling her close. "I like knowing that you are mine and I am yours, that we belong to each other." "For better or worse," Victoria said, echoing their vows. "For better or worse," Xavier agreed and kissed her. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered words and gentle touches as they learned each other in this new way. When Victoria woke the next morning in Xavier's arms, she felt more content and complete than she ever had in her life. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were hard winters when money was tight and supplies ran low. There were times when Xavier's wanderlust pulled at him, and he had to ride out for weeks at a time, working as a guide or a scout to earn extra money and to satisfy that need for movement. There were moments when Victoria felt overwhelmed by the demands of teaching and managing the ranch and wondering if she had bitten off more than she could chew. But through it all, they held fast to each other and to the promises they had made. Xavier never made Victoria feel abandoned when he had to travel, always coming home to her with stories and small gifts and renewed devotion. Victoria never made Xavier feel trapped, understanding that his need to roam was part of who he was and loving him all the more for trusting her with that truth. They built their ranch house over the course of 2 years, working on it themselves whenever time allowed and hiring help when they could afford it. It was everything Victoria had imagined, sturdy and warm, with a big porch and large windows that let in the mountain light. Xavier built her the small schoolhouse too, and within a year, 6 ranch children were coming 3 times a week for lessons. Victoria continued teaching at the Helena school during the regular term, but she poured her heart into the ranch school as well. She loved the intimacy of teaching a small group, the way she could tailor lessons to each child's needs and interests. Xavier often joined them on his days home, teaching the children practical skills like reading tracts, caring for horses, and surviving in the wilderness. In the spring of their 3rd year of marriage, Victoria told Xavier she was expecting a child. He was overjoyed, immediately becoming even more protective and attentive than usual. Victoria laughed at his concern but secretly loved how much he cared. Their son was born on a cold November morning, with a midwife from Helena attending and Xavier pacing nervously outside the bedroom door. When the baby's first cry rang out, Xavier burst into the room and went straight to Victoria's side, tears streaming down his face. "Is he healthy?" "Are you all right?" he asked frantically. "We are both fine," Victoria assured him, exhausted but happy. "Come meet your son." Xavier took the tiny bundle with shaking hands, staring down at the red-faced infant with an expression of such awe and love that Victoria's heart ached. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never settled on one. Now, looking at her husband holding their child, Victoria knew exactly what she wanted. "Samuel," she said, "after my father." Samuel Garrett, Xavier said, testing the name. He looked up at Victoria with shining eyes. It is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect. He leaned over to kiss her forehead. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for this gift, for this life, for everything. Samuel was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a curious, energetic toddler. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, playing with Samuel for hours and teaching him about the animals and the land. Victoria watched them together and felt her love for Xavier deepen even further. He had worried he would not know how to be a father, having been gone from his own family for so long, but his instincts were good and his heart was open. When Samuel was 2, Victoria became pregnant again. This time she delivered a daughter in the summer, with the windows open and wildflowers blooming outside. They named her Rose, and she had Victoria's green eyes and Xavier's dark hair. Life settled into a rhythm that felt both peaceful and full. Xavier continued working for the freight company during the busy seasons, sometimes taking Samuel with him when the boy was old enough. Victoria taught at both schools, wrote letters to Thomas in Helena, and managed the small herd of horses they were beginning to raise. In the evenings, the family would sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Victoria would read aloud from books while the children played at their feet. One evening, when Samuel was 7 and Rose was 5, they were all sitting together after dinner. The children were drowsy, leaning against their parents, and the last light of day was fading from the sky. Xavier reached over and took Victoria's hand. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing this life with me instead of something easier, something more conventional?" Victoria looked at him in surprise. "Not for one single moment. Why would you ask that?" "Because I know it has not always been easy," Xavier said. "The lean years, the times I have had to be gone, raising children out here away from town and society. I worry sometimes that I ask too much of you." "Xavier Garrett, you listen to me," Victoria said firmly. "You gave me the life I wanted, even before I knew what that life looked like. You gave me adventure and purpose and love. You gave me these beautiful children and this beautiful land and a partnership that is true in every way that matters." She squeezed his hand. "I would choose you and this life 1,000 times over, and I would never regret a single moment of it." Xavier's eyes were suspiciously bright as he pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Victoria Garrett. More than I thought it was possible to love another person." "And I love you," Victoria said, "my cowboy who rode back into the storm for me." "Best decision I ever made," Xavier murmured. As the stars began to appear overhead, and their children dozed peacefully beside them, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. If someone had told her 5 years ago that being abandoned in a storm would lead to the greatest happiness of her life, she never would have believed them. But it was true. Xavier had not just saved her life that terrible night. He had given her a life worth living, full of love and purpose and endless possibility. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and occasional sorrows. Victoria's brother, Thomas, married a widow from Helena and became a father to her 2 children, bringing his own happiness into bloom. He remained close to Victoria and Xavier, visiting the ranch regularly and doting on his niece and nephew. Samuel grew into a young man who loved the land as much as his father did, learning everything Xavier could teach him about horses and tracking and surviving in the wilderness. Rose proved to have her mother's passion for learning, devouring every book Victoria could get her hands on and showing a particular talent for mathematics. When Samuel was 15, another child joined the family unexpectedly. Victoria had thought her childbearing years were over, but baby Grace arrived healthy and strong, bringing new joy and chaos into their lives. Samuel and Rose doted on their baby sister, and Xavier, now in his early 40s, proved to be just as patient and loving with this late blessing as he had been with their first children. The ranch prospered as well. The horse herd grew, and Xavier developed a reputation for breeding sturdy, reliable mounts that were perfect for the rough Montana terrain. Buyers came from as far away as Wyoming and Idaho to purchase Garrett horses. Victoria's schools, both in Helena and on the ranch, flourished. She trained 2 younger women to help with the teaching, and the ranch school grew to accommodate nearly 20 children from the surrounding area. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Victoria with a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Thomas and his wife and traveled by stage and then by train to the city by the bay. Victoria had never seen anything like San Francisco. The bustling streets, the grand buildings, the ocean stretching to the horizon. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, attended the theater, and walked hand in hand through Golden Gate Park. On their last evening in the city, they stood on the beach watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. Xavier wrapped his arms around Victoria from behind, just as he had that first day on their land so many years ago. "Thank you for this," Victoria said, "for bringing me here, for showing me something new." "I wanted to give you something special," Xavier said. "To remind you that even after 20 years, I still want to surprise you, still want to make you happy." "You make me happy every day," Victoria said, turning in his arms to face him. "Not with grand gestures or expensive trips, though this has been wonderful, but with the little things. The way you always make sure my coffee is hot in the morning. The way you listen when I talk about my students. The way you look at me like I am still that young woman you met in a storm, even though we have both grown older." "You are still that woman," Xavier said softly. "Brave and smart and beautiful. And I am still the man who could not leave you behind, who will never leave you behind, no matter what storms come our way." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, and Victoria felt, as she always did in Xavier's arms, that she was exactly where she belonged. The journey back to Montana was leisurely, with stops along the way to see the country. When they finally arrived home, the children ran out to greet them, all 3 talking at once about everything that had happened while they were gone. The ranch looked beautiful in the late summer light, the mountains standing guard as they always had, and Victoria felt her heart swell with gratitude. That night, lying in bed beside Xavier, she reflected on the unexpected path her life had taken. She had left Fort Benton as a nervous young woman, uncertain of her future and afraid of the wilderness. Now she was a wife, a mother, a teacher, a rancher. She had built a life that honored all the different parts of who she was, and she had done it alongside a man who loved her completely and unconditionally. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, noticing she was still awake. "How lucky I am," Victoria said. "How blessed we are." "Blessed by a storm," Xavier said with a soft laugh. "Who would have thought?" "I would not change a thing," Victoria said firmly. "Not the storm, not being left behind, not a single moment of what came after, because it all led me to you and to this life we have made." Xavier pulled her closer. "I will never make the mistake of leaving you, Victoria. Not in a storm, not in sunshine, not ever. You are my home wherever we are. And you are mine," Victoria whispered. They fell asleep in each other's arms, as they had done for 20 years, and as they would continue to do for all the years to come. As their children grew into adults, the ranch remained the family's anchor. Samuel eventually took over the day-to-day operations of the horse breeding, showing the same skill and dedication his father had demonstrated. He married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over, a capable young woman named Margaret who fit seamlessly into the family. They gave Victoria and Xavier 4 grandchildren who filled the house with laughter and noise. Rose pursued her education with single-minded determination, eventually becoming a teacher herself. She took over the Helena school when Victoria decided to focus solely on the ranch school, and she brought fresh ideas and new methods that helped the school grow even more. She married later than most women, choosing a quiet geologist named Henry who shared her passion for learning. They had 2 children, both daughters who inherited their mother's quick mind. Grace, the baby of the family, proved to have a gift with horses that surpassed even her father's. She could gentle the wildest colt with patience and understanding, and she developed training techniques that Xavier himself adopted. She married young, to one of Samuel's friends from a neighboring ranch, and they built a life that balanced ranching with raising their own growing family. Through it all, Victoria and Xavier remained the steady center around which the family orbited. They were partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams, weathering the inevitable difficulties that came with running a ranch and raising a family. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they never went to bed angry, and they never let pride stand in the way of apologizing when apologies were due. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. All the children and grandchildren were there, along with Thomas and his family, old friends from Helena and from the surrounding ranches. It was a joyous, noisy affair with food and music and stories that lasted long into the night. As Victoria looked around at the gathered crowd, at all the lives that had been touched by the choice she and Xavier had made so long ago to build a life together, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was what happiness looked like, not perfection but connection, not ease but love, not certainty but faith in each other and in the future they were building together. Xavier found her standing alone on the porch, taking a moment of quiet amid the celebration. He wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. 30 years, he said wonderingly. 30 years since I rode back into that storm and found you. Best thing that ever happened to either of us, Victoria said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I have been thinking about that night a lot lately, Xavier admitted. About how different everything would have been if I had not gone back. You might have survived on your own, made it to Helena, built a good life. But I would have lost the chance to know you, to love you, to build this with you. He gestured at the house, the gathered family, the land stretching out around them. I would have missed everything that matters. But you did not miss it, Victoria said gently. You made the choice to come back, to help me, to stay with me, and that choice changed both our lives for the better. I think about the man I was before I met you, Xavier continued. Always running, always restless, never letting myself get too close to anyone or anything. I thought that was freedom, but it was not. It was just loneliness dressed up as adventure. And now, Victoria asked. Now I know what real freedom is, Xavier said. It is choosing to love someone and to let them love you back. It is building something lasting instead of always moving on to the next thing. It is having roots deep enough to weather any storm. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. You gave me that freedom, Victoria. You taught me that I could be myself and still be part of something bigger, something more important. Victoria felt tears slide down her cheeks. You gave me the same thing, Xavier. You showed me that I did not have to choose between adventure and stability, between independence and partnership. You showed me that I could have it all, as long as we built it together. They kissed, long and sweet, and when they pulled apart, they found most of their family watching them from the windows with fond smiles. You two are embarrassing the grandchildren, Samuel called out with a laugh. Good, Xavier called back. They should see what a real marriage looks like. The celebration continued late into the night, and when the last guest had departed and the house had finally grown quiet, Victoria and Xavier sat together on their porch swing, watching the stars wheel overhead. They had sat in this same spot thousands of times over the years, but it never grew old. The mountains still stood guard, the creek still sang its endless song, and the love between them still burned as bright as it had that first night when a cowboy rode back into a storm for a woman he did not yet know he would love. The years after their 30th anniversary passed quickly, as years do when life is full and rich. Victoria eventually retired from teaching altogether, passing the ranch school to a young woman from Helena who had been her student years before. She spent her days reading, tending her garden, and spoiling her grandchildren, who now numbered 9 in total. Xavier scaled back his work as well, though he never fully stopped. He still trained horses and still occasionally guided hunting parties into the mountains, but mostly he was content to spend his days on the ranch with Victoria, watching the life they had built continue to grow and flourish around them. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their movements slower but still sure. They were there for each other through every difficulty. When Victoria fell and broke her hip at 68, Xavier nursed her back to health with patient devotion. When Xavier developed a persistent cough that worried everyone, Victoria bullied him into seeing the doctor in Helena and made sure he followed every instruction for treatment until he recovered. On the morning of Victoria's 70th birthday, she woke to find Xavier already up and dressed, looking at her with a soft smile. "Come with me," he said, offering his hand. "I want to show you something." She let him lead her outside, wrapped in a warm shawl against the crisp autumn air. He took her to the small rise where they had stood so many years before, planning their life together, and she gasped at what she saw. There, carved into a large flat stone, were the words, "Here stands the home of Xavier and Victoria Garrett, who loved each other, loved this land, and built a legacy that will endure. 1869 forever. Samuel and the boys said it yesterday while you were in town," Xavier explained. "I wanted something permanent, something that would mark this place and what it meant to us." Victoria reached out to trace the carved letters with her fingers, her vision blurred with tears. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Not quite perfect yet," Xavier said, and dropped to one knee before her. "Xavier Garrett, what are you doing?" Victoria exclaimed. "Your knees cannot take that anymore." "My knees are fine," Xavier said, though his grimace suggested otherwise. "Victoria Oakley Garrett, 45 years ago you agreed to marry me, to take a chance on a wandering cowboy who had nothing to offer but his heart. You have given me the most extraordinary life I could have imagined. You have been my partner, my love, my home. And I want to ask you again, here in this place where we dreamed our dreams, will you continue to be my wife, to share this life with me for whatever time we have left?" "Of course I will," Victoria said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I will always say yes to you, Xavier. Always." He stood up with a groan and a laugh, pulling her into his arms. They stood there on their land, holding each other as the sun climbed higher in the sky, and Victoria thought about all the years behind them and whatever years remained ahead. Not all of them had been easy. There had been sorrow along with the joy. The loss of Thomas 5 years prior, the year their barn burned and they had to rebuild. The miscarriage Victoria had suffered between Rose and Grace that had broken both their hearts for a time. But through all of it, they had held fast to each other and to the love that had brought them together in the first place. That love had sustained them, strengthened them, and ultimately defined them. They were no longer just Xavier and Victoria, but something more, something forged in the fires of shared experience and deep commitment. The family gathered that evening for Victoria's birthday celebration, and the house was once again full of noise and laughter. The grandchildren performed a play they had written about a brave teacher and a heroic cowboy, which made both Victoria and Xavier laugh until they cried. There were gifts and stories, and a cake that Rose had spent all day making. As the evening wound down and the family began to depart for their own homes, the oldest grandchild, Samuel's son William, who was now 22, approached Victoria and Xavier with a serious expression. "Grandma, Grandpa, I wanted to tell you both something," he said. "I have been studying to be a teacher like you, Grandma, and I want to take over the ranch school, keep it going for another generation." Victoria's heart swelled with pride and joy. "Oh, William, that would be wonderful. I have been thinking a lot about the story of how you two met," William continued. "About how Grandpa rode back into that storm for you, how he would not make the mistake of leaving you behind. That story has always meant so much to me, because it is about making the right choice even when it is hard. And I want to make that kind of choice too, to commit to something that matters, to build something lasting." He smiled shyly. "I wanted you to know that your story, your example, it has shaped who I am and who I want to be." Xavier reached out and gripped his grandson's shoulder. "That is the finest thing anyone has ever said to me, son. I am proud of you, and I know you will do a wonderful job with the school." After everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Victoria and Xavier prepared for bed in the comfortable silence of long companionship. As they lay down together, Victoria spoke into the darkness. "I have been thinking about what William said, about our story shaping him." "It is a good thought," Xavier said, pulling her close. "It makes me realize that what we built here is bigger than just us," Victoria continued. "It is bigger than this ranch or even our children. We built an example, a model of what love can look like when two people commit to honoring each other's truth and building a life together. And that example will keep rippling out, touching our grandchildren and their children long after we are gone." "That is quite a legacy," Xavier said softly. "It is the best kind of legacy," Victoria said, "because it is built on love, and love is the only thing that really endures." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Victoria, I need to tell you something. I am not afraid of dying. I have lived a full life, a happy life because of you. But I am afraid of leaving you alone." "Do not think about that tonight," Victoria said gently. "We still have time, Xavier. We still have days and months and maybe even years ahead of us. Let us not waste them worrying about the end." "You are right," Xavier agreed, "but promise me something. Promise me that if I go first, you will not stop living. You will stay here on this land we love, surrounded by our family, and you will keep finding joy in every day." "Only if you promise me the same thing," Victoria said. "If I go first, you have to keep going, keep living, keep loving this life we built." "I promise," Xavier said. "I promise too," Victoria whispered. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for over 40 years, and their dreams were peaceful. The seasons turned, as they always do, and Victoria and Xavier moved into their 70s with grace and gratitude. They spent their days quietly, enjoying the simple pleasures of long marriage, morning coffee on the porch, afternoon walks around the property, evenings reading aloud to each other. The family visited often, bringing the grandchildren and, increasingly, the great-grandchildren who were now beginning to arrive. On a bright spring morning in their 74th year of life, Victoria woke to find Xavier still sleeping beside her, breathing peacefully. She lay quietly, watching him, memorizing the beloved features of his face. She thought about the young man he had been when they met, strong and certain, riding back through a storm to save her. She thought about the man he had become, a devoted husband, a loving father, a respected member of the community, a teacher who had shaped countless young lives through his example. She thought about the life they had built together, and she knew with certainty that she would not change a single moment of it. Every joy, every sorrow, every challenge and triumph had been worth it because they had faced it all together. Xavier's eyes opened and he smiled when he saw her watching him. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," Victoria said, leaning over to kiss him. "How are you feeling today?" "Better than I have any right to at my age," Xavier said, sitting up slowly. "What do you say we ride out to the creek today? Like we used to do when we were young." Victoria hesitated. They had not ridden together in several years, both of them feeling too old and stiff for it. But something in Xavier's expression made her agree. "All right. But we go slowly, and we stay close to home." They saddled two of their gentlest horses, old friends who had been with them for years, and rode out across the ranch. The spring grass was green and lush, and wildflowers bloomed everywhere Victoria looked. They rode to the creek where Xavier had first shown her the land, where they had stood so many times planning and dreaming. And there, they dismounted carefully and sat together on the bank. "This is where it all started," Xavier said, looking around with satisfaction. "This is where we began building our dream." "And what a dream it has been," Victoria said, taking his hand. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the water and watching a hawk circle overhead. Then Xavier turned to Victoria with a serious expression. "I want you to know something," he said. "Every single day I have spent with you has been a gift. Every morning I woke up beside you, every evening we sat together, every moment we shared, all of it has been more than I ever thought I deserved. You made me a better man, Victoria. You gave me a reason to stay, to build, to love, and I am grateful for every second of it." "Xavier, why does this sound like goodbye?" Victoria asked, her heart suddenly tight with fear. "It is not goodbye," Xavier assured her. "It is just me making sure you know how much you mean to me, how much this life has meant to me. I do not tell you often enough, and I want to be certain you know." "I know," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "I have always known. And I hope you know the same thing, that you have been everything to me, that loving you has been the greatest joy of my life." Xavier pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "I know," he said softly. "I have always known." They rode back to the house as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. That night, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before, holding hands and watching the stars emerge. "You remember what I told you that first night?" Xavier asked. "In the storm when I came back for you. You said you would not make the mistake of leaving me behind," Victoria said. "And I never did," Xavier said. "Not in 45 years of marriage, and I never will, Victoria. Even when my body gives out and I have to leave this world, my heart will stay with you. My love will stay with you. And mine with you," Victoria said, tears streaming down her face. "Always and forever, Xavier. Always and forever." They sat together late into the night, talking and remembering, holding each other close. And when they finally went to bed, they fell asleep in each other's arms one last time, the way they had every night for over 4 decades. Xavier passed peacefully in his sleep that night, slipping away so quietly that Victoria did not realize he was gone until she woke in the morning. The grief was crushing, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe, but even through the sorrow, Victoria felt grateful. Grateful that he had not suffered, that they had shared one more perfect day together, that their last words to each other had been words of love. The funeral was held 3 days later, and it seemed like everyone they had ever known came to pay their respects. The church in Helena could not hold all the people, so they held the service outside, under the open sky that Xavier had loved so much. Samuel spoke about his father's strength and kindness. Rose spoke about his wisdom and patience. Grace spoke about his humor and his ability to find joy in the smallest things. Then Victoria stood, helped to her feet by her children, and spoke her own words. Xavier Garrett rode back into a storm for me 45 years ago, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. He did it because it was the right thing to do, because leaving me behind would have been a mistake. But what he did not know then was that I would have been lost without him in ways that had nothing to do with that storm. He saved me, not just that night, but every day after. He showed me what love could be when two people commit to each other fully and honestly. He built a life with me that honored both our dreams and both our truths. And though my heart is broken now that he is gone, I am grateful beyond words for every moment we had together. He was, and always will be, the love of my life. They buried Xavier on the ranch, on the rise overlooking the land he had loved, near the stone marker that declared this place their home. Victoria visited the grave every day, talking to him, telling him about the family and the ranch and all the small moments he was missing. It helped, somehow, to maintain that connection, to keep speaking to him even though he could no longer answer. The months after Xavier's death were the hardest of Victoria's life. She had known intellectually that losing him would be difficult, but the reality of living without him was far worse than she had imagined. Everything reminded her of him. The empty place beside her in bed, the coffee cup she set out for him by habit, the silence where his voice should have been. She felt like half of herself had been cut away, and she was learning to walk again with that missing piece. But she kept her promise to him. She did not stop living. She stayed on the ranch, surrounded by her family, and she found small joys in each day. The laughter of her great-grandchildren, the beauty of a sunrise, the memory of Xavier's smile. It was not the same as having him with her, but it was enough to keep going. 6 months after Xavier's death, William came to visit Victoria with news. "Grandma, I wanted to show you something," he said, and handed her a book. It was a slim volume, hand-bound, with the title "The Storm" written on the cover. Victoria opened it and saw that it was the story of how she and Xavier had met, written from William's perspective as a family history. He had interviewed everyone, gathered all the stories and memories, and compiled them into a narrative that captured not just the facts but the love and meaning behind them. "I wanted to make sure the story did not get lost," William explained. "I wanted my children and their children to know about the brave teacher and the cowboy who rode back for her. I wanted them to know what real love looks like." Victoria read through the book with tears streaming down her face, reliving every moment. The storm, the rescue, the journey to Helena, the courtship and marriage, the building of the ranch, the raising of children, the long years of partnership and devotion. It was all there, preserved in William's careful words, a testament to a love that had changed lives and created a legacy. "This is beautiful," Victoria told him, pulling him into a hug. "Your grandfather would have loved this. Thank you, William. Thank you for honoring our story this way." "It is a story worth honoring," William said. "It is a story that reminds us all what really matters." Victoria lived for 3 more years after Xavier's death, and they were peaceful years despite her grief. She spent her time with family, read extensively, tended her garden, and kept Xavier's memory alive through stories and remembrances. She never felt fully whole without him, but she found a way to be content, knowing that they would be reunited someday. On a warm summer evening, just a few weeks shy of her 78th birthday, Victoria's heart simply stopped beating. She passed away in her sleep, in the house she and Xavier had built together, surrounded by photographs of their life and love. Her children found her the next morning, looking peaceful, with a slight smile on her face as though she had been dreaming of something wonderful. They buried Victoria beside Xavier on the rise, under the same marker that declared this land their home. At the funeral, the entire family gathered, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren who had been born in the years since Xavier's death. It was a celebration of a life well lived, of a love that had endured, of a legacy that would continue. Samuel, now an old man himself, stood to speak. "My parents taught us many things," he said, his voice strong despite his age. "They taught us about hard work and honesty. They taught us about respecting the land and caring for family. But most importantly, they taught us about love. Real love, the kind that lasts through storms and struggles and the passing of years. They showed us that love is not about finding someone perfect, but about choosing someone and then choosing them again every single day. They showed us that the best legacy you can leave is not money or property, but the example of how to live a good life and love a good partner." He paused, looking around at the assembled family. "This ranch will continue. The name of Garrett will continue. But more than that, the love that built this place will continue. It will ripple out through all of us and through our children and their children. And that is because a cowboy once rode back into a storm for a woman he barely knew, because he knew it was the right thing to do. Because he would not make the mistake of leaving her behind. And from that one choice, all of this was born." As the family gathered for a meal after the funeral, sharing stories and memories, William brought out copies of his book and distributed them to everyone. "This is your heritage," he told the younger generation. "This is where you come from. Remember it, honor it, and carry it forward." Years continued to pass, and the story of Xavier and Victoria Garrett became a treasured part of family lore. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations, and the stone marker on the rise became a place of pilgrimage for descendants who wanted to connect with their roots. The schoolhouse Victoria had built continued to operate, teaching children from the surrounding ranches, keeping her dream alive. On the 100th anniversary of that stormy night when Xavier had ridden back for Victoria, the family held a reunion on the ranch. Hundreds of people gathered, all descended from or connected to Xavier and Victoria Garrett. They toured the property, visited the graves, and listened as the eldest members of the family told the stories they had heard from their own grandparents who had known Xavier and Victoria personally. The youngest member of the family, a little girl named Victoria who was 7 years old, raised her hand with a question. "Why is this story so important?" she asked. "I mean, they just fell in love and got married like lots of people do." Her great-great-grandfather smiled down at her. "Because, little Victoria, they showed us that love is a choice. Xavier chose to go back for her when everyone else rode on. Victoria chose to trust him and build a life with him. And every day after that, they kept choosing each other, kept choosing their family, kept choosing to do the hard work of building something lasting. That is why we remember them, not because they were perfect, but because they were committed. Not because life was easy for them, but because they faced the hard times together. They left us an example of what real love looks like, and that example has shaped this whole family." The little girl thought about this for a moment, then nodded. "I want to love someone like that someday." "Then you will," her great-great-grandfather said, "because you come from people who knew how to love well, and that knowledge is in your blood." As the sun set over the ranch that evening, the family gathered around a bonfire and sang old songs that Victoria had taught in her school. Someone brought out a fiddle, and there was dancing under the stars. Children ran and played in the same fields where their ancestors had played generations before. And somewhere, perhaps, Xavier and Victoria looked down on it all and smiled, knowing that the love they had built together continued to echo through time, shaping lives and hearts they would never meet but whose existence was a direct result of one simple choice made on a stormy night long ago. The choice not to leave someone behind, the choice to turn back, the choice to love and to keep loving no matter what storms might come. The story of the wagon master who left her in the storm, and the cowboy who rode back and said, "I will not make that mistake," became more than just a family story. It became a legend in Montana territory, and then Montana state, told and retold as an example of courage, love, and the kind of choices that define a life. It was published in local newspapers, included in history books about the settling of the West, and passed down through oral tradition in communities throughout the region. But for the Garrett family, it was always more than a legend. It was their foundation, their beginning, their reason for being. It was the storm that brought their family into existence, the love that had sustained them through generations, the legacy that would continue long after every person at that 100th anniversary gathering had passed into memory themselves. Because real love, the kind that Xavier and Victoria Garrett shared, does not die. It transforms, it continues, it ripples out through time and space, touching lives in ways that cannot be measured or predicted. It becomes not just a story but a living thing, carried forward in the hearts and choices of everyone who hears it and recognizes its truth. And so the story ends where it began, with a choice, with love, with two people who found each other in the midst of a storm and decided to build something that would outlast them both. It ends with a ranch still standing, a family still growing, and a legacy still shaping the future. It ends with the certainty that when the right person chooses you, when they refuse to leave you behind even when it would be easier, when they commit to you fully and honestly, that choice can change everything. Not just for you, not just for them, but for generations yet unborn who will carry that love forward into a future none of us can see. The storm passed. The cowboy stayed. And love, as it always does when it is real and true, prevailed.